So
But let's talk a little bit about the risks, because I read this article that was very critical. But I've come to that it's all about perspectives. Like they were looking at ayahuasca from one perspective only, about people who had terrible experiences with it, who had met terrible shamans. And because from what I understand, if you are on Prozac, that's not good. Like if you have anxiety and depression and you are on Prozac, you can't take ayahuasca. That's not a good combination. And I think some people or one person went into coma, and there are some stories. And then I think, it has to do with what you're speaking about, that you have the right frames and that you meet the right shaman, and that you're not on any drugs from before, and that you take it really seriously. It has to be done in the right way.
It has to be. It has to be. First of all, let's just say very simply that many, many, many medications in this world, when administered inappropriately, are lethal or significantly dangerous.
That's true.
Okay, you're going to go into surgery. You have an anesthesiologist. You don't pump yourself full of the substances necessary for you to have surgery. When you need different kinds of medications that are considered potentially more dangerous, you have to get a physician's prescription. You have to fulfill that prescription in a very specific place called a pharmacy, where there is control over the entirety of that pursuit. And then you are told very specifically that you have to be of sound mind and responsible to follow the dosification of those pills or of those medicines. Now people all of a sudden come to ayahuasca and they hear that there is this miracle experience in the Amazon. The very first thing we want to say is no, it is not a miracle experience in the Amazon, although healing and transformation can be very miraculous. The second part of it we want to understand is that the combination of chemicals have tremendously long lists of contraindications to other Western medicines. Long. So if you were there's at least 30, 40, 50 regularly prescribed medications, including Prozac, including all SSRIs, all MAOI inhibitors, all different expressions of psychiatric medications that are all contraindicated to ayahuasca. So for instance, at our center, we require, if anybody is on those medications, to come off the medications before they come to us under physician assistance and guidance, so that they don't even come off them on their own, that their doctors are recommending that they come off the medication to be able to try an alternative treatment. And then we require, for cases that are more significant, where there could provide a greater risk to us or to the participants, that they have to be able to have a doctor's signature and a doctor's letter from their home country explaining that they are of sound health to be able to participate in the experience with us.
Right.
So there, I would ask all of the people that were involved in that article, was that the treatment that they received? Was that the nature of the use of the medicine that they received? And I would say probably in most cases, no. Probably in most cases, that would not be the case. And so right there, I say there's a lack of professionalism.
Yeah, right. Because the shamans hadn't asked them if they were on any medication.
Correct,
or
but
if they did have high blood pressure and so on.
Sure, and here in this case, what I would say is that is not the shaman's responsibility, because that is outside of the shaman's culture. Because the shaman would never prescribe those drugs. The shaman would never prescribe the antidepressants or the antipsychotic medications. The shaman would have his or her own way of deducing what treatment would be received from that person, and that it would not always include ayahuasca. And what has happened over the years is that as the Westerners' fixation on ayahuasca has grown, that many of the other practices in the Amazon for healing that take much longer, that take a lot more supervision over a lot longer period of time, are not used as often, because the patients or the guests or the participants don't have that time away from their normal life to come receive treatments. And so you're seeing two problems form. One problem is that the shamans are not part of the cultures that have created these medications to affect the nature of brain chemistry. In the Amazon, they only use 5 or 6 plants to affect brain chemistry, and they never, ever use them in conjunction with the other plants.
So,
And so you have safety mechanisms within their own indigenous culture that the Westerners coming are already outside of. Then you have the nature of Westerners who don't want to follow the rules of drinking ayahuasca, and the rules are very specific. You should be on no other Western medication at all. You should not eat any kind of foods that have any concentrations of sugars that are sweet to the taste. You have to stay away from all meats that are incredibly fatty. You have to eat mostly fish, plantains, and rice when you have that experience in the nature of the tradition. Now, many centers, including our own, have pushed the nature of that through our own experimentation to expand the nature of diet. But Westerners don't like discipline in general, nor do they like their diet being changed, nor do they like their sexual proclivities being changed. You are not supposed to have any sexual interaction during the time of ayahuasca, including a duration after it. You're not supposed to include any alcohol.
Why is that?
Why is that? It has to do with the subtleties of the nature of the energies involved.
Okay.
It has to do with the nature of where and how ayahuasca affects you. And they are all safety measures and mechanisms because you are in a significantly altered state of consciousness. And in that altered state of consciousness, you do not behave, respond, understand, cognate, remember the same way you do when you're in your normal state of consciousness. And so the indigenous peoples already had this incredible list of requirements necessary just to participate in ayahuasca. Like, for instance, in the Amazon, for Alberto, when he was 9 years old, when they started his training to participate in an ayahuasca ceremony, he had to be in dieta for 30 days.
What's that?
That is preparation.
Okay.
It is diet. It is in a diet space. No sugars, no sweets, no spicy foods, no fatty meats, no condiments, no extra oils, no extra spices of any kind on your food for 30 days of purification for one ayahuasca ceremony. Now you have people coming from all over the world who are taking cocaine. They're taking other illnesses, other substances. They are participating all different kinds of activities that led them to these problems in the first place. And then they're coming and immediately participating in ayahuasca ceremonies.
So
many of the antidepressant drugs require weaning off for 1 to 3 months before an ayahuasca ceremony to be completely clear of the antidepressant or antipsychotic medications. And so then if you look at it from that perspective, there's a much greater understanding of what's at play here. And it's not as simple as the reporters report, this is the good, this is the bad.
It's lack of information, and it's just one perspective, and they make up their minds. I mean, it was obvious, but I just wanted to read, different things about this.
And it's important, and I think that that's important too. But, I think that in this case, something as vast as the study of ayahuasca, requires somebody to have more experience with it before they really even speak about it. Like in my case, I was offered the opportunity to write books when I had 30, 40, 50, 60 ceremonies of experience. And I am really glad I did not write the books.
You weren't ready?
I'm astoundedly happy that I did not write the books about ayahuasca at that time. And then I look at the books that are out there now, and many are written by people who have very limited experience with the plants. And all I would say to them is go train, go live in the Amazon, go live for a decade, drink ayahuasca in ceremony 1,000 times. That's 1,000 full nights of your life. That's almost 3 years of consecutive days of training. And then tell me if you would write the same book. And I know for a fact that I would not have written the same things after 30 ceremonies as I would after 100. I would not have written the same things after 500. I would not have written the same things after 800. I would not have written the same things after 1,000. And I would not have written the same things after 1,200 ceremonies.
Do you know how many ceremonies you've had?
Not exactly, but it's over 1,200.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about the ceremonies.
Sure.
It was so interesting to follow this documentary where we followed these Westerners who had 5 different ceremonies, and they had different problems, and they were really open about their experiences, and we also saw them in the ceremony. So can you kind of walk us through what happens firstly in a ceremony, in your ceremony?
Yeah, in an ayahuasca ceremony, you first sing to the ayahuasca. You sing what are called icaros, and the icaros are a sacred language that is learned between the practitioner and what the visions communicate, and it's a way of guiding in sound, not just symbols and code in the form of like words and language, but guiding in sound vibrations, the energies that are involved in the ceremonies. And so that is to tell the ayahuasca the purpose of the ceremony. And then after that, each person is served individually. The dose is different per person. And the shaman is supposed to be able to know what is the appropriate amount for each person. And then after that, more icaros are sung to that to prepare that specific dose of ayahuasca for that person. And so, you're uniting the ayahuasca, which is going to be the visionary medicine, not just in general a visionary medicine, but now this specific dose, this specific amount, these molecules of visionary medicine that are going to be administered to the participant in the ceremony. And then after that, the participant drinks, and then the shamans usually serve themselves last. And then they drink as well. And the idea is that everybody is going to go into the visionary state, and inside that visionary state, the spirits, the visions, the energies that are involved are going to be wielded to create shifts in consciousness that produce healing. And so when we get into the ceremony after 15 to 20 minutes really starts, because that's when the effects of the ayahuasca normally start kicking in. Sometimes it's faster and sometimes it's slower. Sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's 2 hours, 3 hours before they kick in. But normally it's somewhere between 15 minutes to 30 minutes. And then you go into the experience. The experience usually starts to warm the body. You feel a sensation that goes down to the toes. You feel that sensation come all the way up into the brain. I think that's the activation of the nervous system as the ayahuasca is starting to kick in. The nature of the physical changes that are associated with it. Ayahuasca is a purgative, and so it has the ability to create vomiting. It has the ability to create defecation.
And it tastes awful, right? I've heard.
Yeah, I think most people would agree that the taste is very pungent. It's very earthy. It's very bitter, and it's a flavor that once you drink it, you'll never forget.
Okay.
Like, you'd know that flavor, It's very hard to describe in the nature, but I just think it tastes like, if you wanted to chew into some really tasty tree bark, just really chew some tree bark and add some really, really, really strong bitterness, like grapefruit bitterness peel to it. Okay. So imagine very bitter and very earthy. Okay. Like if you smelled like peat moss, and you really smelled that like earth and very and bitter. Yeah.
So you can vomit just because it tastes awful?
Very few people do, but I have seen it. But most people can drink it and get it down.
Okay.
Most people can drink it and get it down. Then they wash their mouth out and spit, and then it's not, so bad. It's not such a rough aspect of the experience. But I would say that the taste is really the most minimal aspect of the experience. Even though a lot of people get pretty wild about the taste, I would say that's the least of your concerns, because you're about ready to be at an ayahuasca ceremony.
Right.
And then the ayahuasca ceremony at that point, I think, varies dramatically between practitioners, and it varies dramatically in terms of experience. And so at that point, it really depends on what ceremony you're in, what's going to happen. But in our ceremonies, like I said, are dedicated to healing. And so we start to open up what is known as the visionary effects of the ayahuasca. Like you start to call them, you chant, you
call the spirits?
Shakapas. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the whole point of the ceremony. You're going to call spirits to the ceremony, and the spirits are going to do the healing.
And then it's about not calling in the dark spirits, because that's part of the reason why a shaman is there, right? You have to know who the spirits are to be able to be a practitioner. You have to know what you're calling. You have to be able to read them. You have to be able to interact with the visions. You have to be able to understand what's happening. You have to be able to read that language. You have to be able to speak that language. And you have to be able to wield it to be able to create very specific directions or shifts of change for people. But let me ask you, so you're talking about other spirits. So it's more about calling in external spirit spirits, or is it more, because I'm thinking about the higher self, and when you take this, I would assume that you kind of get this opening to your own consciousness and your own higher self, but you're talking about external spirits. Is it like this combined thing that there are external spirits and at the same time you're exploring your own consciousness?
All of it. I mean, I
All of
think
it.
that those questions and those differentiations are very hard to agree upon at this point. I would say from the Amazonian traditional perspective, which I'm not saying is right, I'm just saying from the traditional Amazonian perspective, the plants all have their own spirits, but they don't have the same spirits. They believe that everything that's alive has a spirit. So a jaguar has a spirit, you have a spirit, that jaguar spirit is that jaguar spirit, you have your spirit. They also believe in a collective spirit. So they believe all jaguars represent the jaguar spirit. They would say you have human spirit. And so I think what they're saying is that the nature of the energies that exist on the planet right now are spirit. I think that's what they're saying. And I think Westerners have fragmented that inside their own mind, and they've separated out into different categories that the Amazonian people are not using.
Okay.
So I think they're just saying, like, I'm using ayahuasca to help you, so I'm telling ayahuasca to get involved in the helping of you. And they would say, well, what do you call? And you go, it's spirit. But the shaman would look at you and think you're dumb. The shaman would be like, why don't you know that? Like, where did you not learn that already? How could you get to be 30, 40, 50, 60 years old in this life and not know that that's just what this is? That's what they think. We think, how'd you ever get to think like that? How'd you ever learn that? How'd you ever understand that? How'd you ever discover that? And they say, look around you. It's all around you. What would you expect? It's all around you. What would you expect? It's all around you. And they would say, that's the spirit. And they'd repeat it like 100 times to you, wondering why you don't understand. And they would just consider rote repetition as the way to describe it. So they're saying, like in our ayahuasca, we usually use anywhere between 8 and 13 plants, not just the 2.
Oh, okay.
And so we have all of those that are in play, and we're calling the spirits of all of those.
Okay,
we
so
know
it's
that
the
they're in
spirits
the ayahuasca.
of these plants. It's not like...
No. That's just the beginning.
Oh, okay.
That's just the beginning. So you have 8, 12, 13 plants in the ayahuasca. You're working with those.
Okay.
Now you have them in the forest all around you. You're working with those. Now you have them that are made of the plants. You're working with those. Then you have the ones that are made of the natural forces. You're working with those. Then you have the ones that come from the sky realms. Then you're working with those. Then you have the ones from the under earth realms. You're working with those. Then they have the ones from the water realms. You're working with those. Then they have the ones from the space realms. You're working with those. Then they have the ones from the angelic realms. You're working with those. Then they have the ones from, see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's pretty crowded.
It's very crowded. It's very crowded. And in each of those realms, there's millions of millions of millions of different kinds. And there's millions and millions and millions of each kind.
Yeah.
And that's why people say they see like so much stuff in ayahuasca, because that's what they're seeing.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because from what I saw in this documentary, it seemed like they were meeting their own shadows in a way, like that they started having really bad experiences, or, I mean, I can't, it's difficult to find a word for it.
Yeah, they're described as dark or negative or painful or scary or demonic in its nature based off of what they see.
So I've done a lot of interviews about the afterlife and near-death experiences where some people go to this dark place, like they would call a hellish place or purgatory. And I don't know, if that's your consciousness or if it's actually a place, or I don't know. I haven't been there. But I kind of thought about it when I saw this documentary, that it seemed like they were creating their own hell, like they were in this dark place and met their worst fears. Now, is that your perspective too? Like they met their own fears to cleanse it, to get it out of the system?
Sure. I mean, I don't really know the origins, and I don't think it really matters. Like you are expressing a certain kind of doubt around really, how does this work? And I came to realize that that aspect of it was less important than what took place inside that.
Okay.
And what takes place inside it is vast and interesting in the sense that it's extrasensory, it's very lucid. You're not drunk like when you're drunk on alcohol. You're totally clear. You are completely in that space. The visions are 100% real at that time. And they are representing an experience of something that for those people represent mental illness or depression or problems or insecurities or anxieties or lack of direction in life. And so the question of, where do they come from? What are they? Is it just in themselves? Is it outside of themselves? I think that isn't really a way to understand it, but rather it's easier to understand that when all of those visions clear, they don't have those problems inside their mind anymore. And not only do they not have those problems inside their mind anymore about the nature of the experience, after the experience, 3 months later, 4 months later, 6 months later, a year later, they don't have those same thought patterns anymore. They don't have the same anxieties. They don't have the same fears that were all directly connected to the nature of those visions. So there's a direct corollary that is repetitive, that when in vision, when you now clear that stuff out of your vision, that something dramatically changes in the nature of your consciousness. That is a permanent change that is known as a positive change, a life-affirming change, and one where those problems that brought the person to the ayahuasca are no longer manifest. So you have a person with an anxiety disorder or a post-traumatic stress disorder or an addiction or depression, and you bring them into that ayahuasca ceremony, they have the nature of those visions, and then they release them in ceremony, and then they no longer have the cognitive patterns after it that represented what they knew of as the illness. And so there isn't a specific way at this point in our understanding scientifically to describe what that interaction is or what that exchange is. But there is enough to be able to see a corollary that it does create what we know of as healing or relief of symptom or change in cognitive pattern. And I think that's really interesting. And as an example of that, I would like to tell a little story. Very early in my apprenticeship, there was a gentleman who came to me who had very low self-esteem, very, very low self-esteem. He had a self-critical voice inside of his own mind that hurt him and tore him down on the inside all the time. And what I found out interesting about that was, one, that's common. That inside the Western psyche, a self-criticism of someone's own beingness is common. And I thought that was one very fascinating and also very odd, because we are not born with that inside us. We're not born self-criticizing our little baby bodies.
No, I think we have perfect
right?
self-love when we're born.
And then all of a sudden we learn that. Now, we don't know exactly how we learn it, other than that it's in the society and it's in people and it's perpetuated and it's traumatic. Now, this was very early on in apprenticeship, so I knew nothing of the things that I was talking about today. And I was in my early 20s. I was maybe 24 years old, and that person asked for my help. So in the ayahuasca ceremony, I went up to that person. And in my vision, I saw around their heads images that were about an inch tall that looked like little faces, very much akin to gremlins from the Gremlin movies, like little creature heads with little ears and big eyes and these jagged little teeth that would fly around his head in a swarm like that. So I just saw a swarm of hundreds of them flying around his head. Okay, up until that point, inside my head, I had no self-criticism. I had no judgment of myself. I was going to go help the person, and everything was going to be completely normal. I walk up to the person. I engage the person to help them and say, okay, I'm going to help you now. I start playing a rattle over their body. And in that moment that I did that, all of a sudden I have voices inside my head going, your medicine sucks. You can't do this. You can't help this person. Self-criticism, 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 self-criticism. So I'm like, oh, sweet, I'm linked. So now I start removing all of them in the ways that I learned. And you use the shakapa, you use the rattle like this, you move it like this, it makes a sound. You're in vision, and you sing to the person to be strong and to be clear in energy and to be bright and to have their auric field be bright and to have their energy be very straightened and strong. And then I used birds and angels from that you call in the chants to literally come and pick off all of those little images. Just the images. When the last image was gone, the last self-critical voice out of my head was gone, and the last self-critical voice out of his was gone. And 5 minutes later, he said, for the first time in my life, I have no self-critical thoughts in my head. Wow. That lasted the next day, that lasted the next day, that lasted the next day, that lasted the next day. It has lasted. It always lasts. It's the nature of how it works inside the medicine practices. What I would like to explain is that that is not ayahuasca. That's not ayahuasca doing that. That's ayahuasca opening everybody into a state of consciousness to be able to see that, understand that, know that, and now do something very specific for that in terms of the shamanic arts, which would be considered a bintiada or a healing.
Like that you really believe in it, or that you're open for it? Because, I mean, many people are doing therapy and they're doing inner child work and they know about their patterns in their minds, but it doesn't disappear.
They don't know how to break them. That's my point. Right. This is the point that I'm saying. Inside the Amazonian arts, an Amazonian ayahuasca shaman who practices, who is professional and trained, has over a decade of experience in these kinds of experiences to be able to navigate and know them all. So that that person knows exactly how to help 15, 20, 30, 40 people, 50 people in ayahuasca at the same time. Okay, those are not because that is not happening because of ayahuasca, and that's the point I'm making. Ayahuasca is a substance that can be misused, used as a medicine, used as a drug. It can be used however you use it. You're the one deciding what it is, not it deciding for you what it is. You're deciding what it is, right? And then the medicine practices, which are not all the practices. The medicine-based practices are practices that are learned over tremendously long periods of time, so that somebody can understand that, understand those visions, understand those pieces, understand the removal of those pieces, understand the centering of the brain, and have an outcome be the removal of that negative self-critical voice. Now, I would personally be incredibly critical of most of the spiritual-based, quote-unquote, therapeutic or healing modalities, because everybody that came to me over the last 13 years, literally in the tens of thousands, have done all of that work and still have the same problems. Like I said from the very beginning, I was only interested in what worked. I was only interested in what was completely real and that could be understood ultimately scientifically. It was not enough for me for it to be based in belief. And so if somebody did the shadow work, and somebody did the catharsis work, and somebody did the psychotherapy work, and somebody did the inner child and the self-healing work, and then somebody did the self-help work, and then somebody did the Jungian archetypal work, and then somebody did the subconscious work, why do they still have problems?
Yeah, but I think some practices work for some.
I think some practices work for some, and I think some practices work for others. But I think at that point, we can have a much more open discussion about the nature of what's working and what's not working. Who are the therapists? Who aren't the therapists? Who have the training to really be able to understand? Who doesn't? Where is it really working? Where isn't it working?
Right.
Why is it working? Why isn't it working? And then we could understand in a much greater way and perfect a much more, holistic understanding of these healing arts, and to understand why they work for some people versus others not, why certain things are easier to understand. And I think the answer to all of that is ultimately not found inside spirituality, mysticism, or shamanism, but rather consciousness. And that consciousness is the source of all of those practices, as well as consciousness being the source of all Western medicine, as well as consciousness also being the source of all of the illnesses and difficulties and problems that bring people to these healing modalities in the first place.
Right. But let me go a little bit back to the ceremony, and
Sure.
We talked about the dark side of it, or the difficult side. But I've also heard that people have these wonderful visions of, for instance, what is it called? Sacred geometry and stuff like that.
Sure, that's one of the first things they see is the sacred geometry, the ayahuasca art, the Shipibo designs. That is the most common thing to see inside ayahuasca. Like you within 15, 20, 30 minutes, you start seeing designs on everything. You see designs on the shamans, you see designs on the walls, you see designs on the floor, you see designs on your own body, you see designs that are in the room, in the space. As the visions open up and the shamans chant and sing, you can see the designs coming out of their mouth.
Like the
taking
energy
shape.
actually behind the scenes, you can kind of
Totally.
see.
Oh, you
Yeah.
see the grids. You see
You see
literally
the
the grids.
grid.
You see
Oh.
grids. You see grids and patterns that are all represented in natures of energies, and those are mappable. Those are a language that shamans learn to speak, and that they're not just symbols and concepts. They are actual languages that move in a very, very fast pattern, and they are very subtle expressions inside normal physical reality. And so I think that the shamans are literally seeing patterns of energy that are there in the air. It's patterns of energy that are there in the bodies. It's patterns of energy that are in the space. It's patterns of energy that exist in the universe, and that under these influences of these different substances in these altered states of consciousness, you can have a very awakened consciousness experience of all of these phenomenon that are naturally part of life itself.
Right, and we can understand more about the mysteries then.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully. And so the visions starting there are very common, but the visions will go, there's lots of different kinds of visions. There's those kinds of visions.
Yeah.
There are visions that happen inside that. There are shapes and forms that happen inside the current. So imagine that art, that the nature of those patterns and what you see is constantly changing, morphing, evolving, emerging other shapes, emerging beings that speak to you, emerging
Can you see past lives and everything? Can you
you can see anything.
Anything.
It's anything. It's your experience. It's your brain that's awakening. It's your consciousness that's turning on. It's your emotional states that are settling and getting really calm.
Can you control the experiences on some level?
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
100%.
Absolutely,
Okay.
100%. Yeah, but you have to be trained, because you have to be capable of being calm in a situation that would naturally make you unbelievably agitated.
Right. So that's what you do, because I read a little bit on your website. You talk a lot about what to expect and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at our center in the Amazon, what we do is we try to provide the safest, most professional experience possible, which includes the greatest amount of orientation. So we've even created a sacred plant optimization package that if you go to Blue Morpho Tour's website, if you put in your email, you can get that before going into sacred plant experiences. We send it out to all of our guests, but we also made it open to the entire population of anybody having sacred plant experiences, so that they could get from us what we think is the core and most necessary information to have. And then we also have integration packages after the retreats themselves, so that you have ongoing support after these peak experiences. The control factor is all about your own comfort and your willingness to engage the experience. But you have to really be willing to engage the ayahuasca. And if the ayahuasca is scary or it's scaring you, it's very difficult to do that, because there's already a sort of pullback associated with it. But the visions are incredible, from the dark ones to the light ones to the open ones to not. To the more closed ones, the more that are more bright, the more that are more multidimensional, the ones that are less, they are all incredible in their nature, because you're having a real experience, whether or not it is substance produced, or whether or not it's personally produced, or whether or not it's the rhythms, or all of it together, that in its complexity, when it's together, is a little misunderstood. You're having that experience, and that's what's undeniable. And that's what people say after it. They say, like, if somebody saw an angel, they say, I saw an angel. If somebody saw a demon, they go, I saw a demon. If somebody saw a plant spirit, they go, I saw a plant. If somebody saw a jaguar, they go, I saw a jaguar. It's not, I saw a thing that was kind of a luminous and I thought it was kind of like a jaguar. They're like, no, I saw a jaguar. Another one goes, I saw an eagle. Another one says, I saw dolphins. Another one says, I saw outer space. I saw spiral galaxies. Another person tells me they went inside a black hole into an Einsteinian wormhole, and they went into, another dimension and another space on the other side of a black hole. No one comes out of the experience saying, well, I kind of sort of thought, I kind of sort of, like in a cartoon on kind of sort of Sunday morning, I kind of no. They come out of it like, I had these experiences. And I think that's like the real interesting aspect of it, is that the people themselves even though it's so foreign to them, are willing to say that it really happened, totally outside of their normalcy. And I would like to add to that this is not a discussion about just the mind seeing things that are held within its own subconscious or its own unconscious. Many people have visions of things that they've never, ever seen before, have no historical reference for, have no background understanding for, and then they start to describe it, and then other people see the same thing in the same ceremony, that they also have no recognition for, no background for. And in my own case, I've seen things in ayahuasca visions that I had no historical reference for, that I actually saw carved and turned into artwork. So the very first time I ever saw it was in an ayahuasca vision, that shape. And then the very next time I saw it carved in wood, or I saw it painted by somebody else who had drunk ayahuasca. And so I say, okay, right there, we're starting to get some very interesting reaches into collectives and understandings that I think are worthy of investigation. I think they're worthy to understand.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's worthy of researching and exploring in safe ways, like we've been speaking about today.
Absolutely, it has to be safe.
We can learn about consciousness, and I think that's missing in Western medicine, is the consciousness part. Is all about the brain, and we need to explore.
We're missing the consciousness part, and that's where we're that's what the focus of 14 years in the Amazon turned into for me, was an understanding that consciousness was the seminal component that was misunderstood, and that we needed to have a way to understand the consciousness in conjunction with the mystical practices or the psychological practices or the psychiatric practices. We needed that in the mental health field, period, because that was the most seminal state. That was the great pool from which all experiences were stemming. And that it was clearly biologically related. It was clearly mystically related, sort of the greater beyond, where people experience mystical or psychomagical or religious experiences, which is very common in ayahuasca. Very common. I mean, it's very, very, very common for people who have no beliefs whatsoever to come out of it and have experiences, direct experiences of mythological figures from what are now modern or Western religions. So from the actual players in the story, like you read the Bible and here are all of these different people mentioned, and then in the ayahuasca ceremony, the people have experiences of those, not the stories, the elements within the story. So if an angel's mentioned, people in ayahuasca have had direct experience with that angel. If Christ is mentioned, people in ayahuasca have direct experience of Christ. Same thing goes to Buddhism. And people who have knowledge of Buddhism have ayahuasca ceremonies and have direct experiences of Buddhic philosophy. In Hinduism, in self-realization, the same. And in Kabbalah mysticism, in the mystic arts of Judaism, the exact same experiences in those natures, that people are having direct, relatable, psychomagical or religious experiences over and over and over again. They are consistencies, and again, no explanation. Right? No real explanation of why these people are having these experiences. Most of the people that I found, very interestingly enough, that have those experiences, when it's of tremendous impact, have none of that background within themselves. So it's just slight things in the past, maybe a couple times, maybe they went to church because of weddings or something like that, but really nothing. And then all of a sudden in ayahuasca, these awakenings happen where these elements become more interactive parts of their life.
Kind of like yourself.
Very much so like myself. I mean, that was exactly what had happened to me. Although I had those experiences before even getting to ayahuasca, which I found very, very amazing, that it was not just the substance produced, which then again led me back to consciousness. It's like, if you can have them in ayahuasca on the substance and you can have them outside of ayahuasca off the substance, they cannot be specifically substance induced. And so there's something else going on. There's something else going on. And I think that's the reality, is that we are very much, very, very, very much in the phase of the exploration of this something else going on. There's now a much greater openness around spiritual conversation. There's a much greater openness around dabbling in the arts and in the practices for personal benefit, self-help. There's a tremendous amount of exploration going on now, and what's burgeoning psychedelic research. And I think that's going to end up creating, many more practices, as well as a vast and greater understanding. And we're going to little by little, remove the mysteries, but still leave the mysticism. You understand the parts that you can understand, and you understand that the universe is ultimately greater than all of those understandings.
I think so too. I think we can understand a lot, but not it all, perhaps.
Perhaps yet.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if forever, but certainly not
Yeah.
yet. I mean, certainly there are still at each rung.
Maybe
of
not
the
in this
interaction.
body.
Yeah. I mean, in the interactions, it seems like the more we understand, the more questions we get.
Yeah,
The
I
more we
feel
understand,
that
the
way.
more questions we get, and that's very, very fascinating. But
Yeah.
ultimately, if you go to drink ayahuasca and you participate with professional shamans that offer a professional service, that have training, and that they know what they're doing, you are going to have a very expanding, very ultimately positive experience. It will be peppered with difficulties at different periods of time, and experiences that might be seen as unwanted. Those are all survived. It's a courageous pursuit, and it does not require your belief. It requires your openness to be willing to participate. Just the openness to participate is enough. If you go in with very rigid beliefs against the experience and you don't believe it at all the ayahuasca is going to do is show you a reason to change those views. Just by giving you experiences that are unexplainable in your current way. With that understanding, though, and like what I said before, the severity of the practices is real. What people say about them is exactly how it goes down. And people can face the most terrifying nights of their life. They can face thinking that they're dead. They can face having full death experiences. But as Alberto says, los muertos no hablan, which means the dead don't speak. So when you have a guy in ceremony telling you he's dead, he's not.
Okay.
He's just having an experience of that.
I was glad you said that.
That is like a notion of death experience that is highly, generated in the nature of consciousness. It's very akin to reality, but it doesn't negatively affect the physical body. So the physical body's there fine, the vitals are all there fine, but the person is having an experience of moving beyond the nature of physicality, and that those movements are widely accepted and, in many ways enjoyed in ayahuasca. They are an experience of expansion. You have two different kinds of people really drinking ayahuasca. You have more mystic-based people who are there for real exploration. Like they are exploring the boundaries of consciousness. And they like to push those boundaries, and they like to understand the nature of their consciousness. Then you have people there for healing, and they're usually a little more delicate because they're not wanting to push the boundaries. The boundaries have already been pushed in them. And so they need a much gentler notion of that treatment. They need a much gentler overall experience. And that may take longer, And like I said, ultimately, it comes to not just the visions, but the visions in conjunction with the shamans, in conjunctions with what the shamans called spirits. That doesn't matter whether you call them or not, because for the shamans, they're so repeatable that the language is not what's being quibbled over. It just is that way. They're using life force energies that are measurable to be able to create very specific brainwave and consciousness shifts. It's very misunderstood. Mostly, they are true medicine practitioners, not just a spiritual art, but they are true doctors in the same way that you would consider a Western doctor. And I think it's best if you relate to them and treat them in that way. When you treat them as like an enlightened mystic, it's misunderstood. They're not exactly like that. They're very much people who live of life. They live like totally normal life. They have families and marriages and children, and they pass down the lineages and family lineages, and they fish and they hunt to eat, and they grow food, and they make canoes, and they scrape by to make money, and with their money they buy clothes, and they buy treats for their kids and stuff. It's not like they're the enlightened mystics of the forest. They're incredibly knowledgeable.
They're not gurus.
No, they're not gurus. They're not gurus at all, and they don't want followers. In general, they're not interested in followers. They're interested in performing the art that is their medicine.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been so informative, and I really felt like we got some more perspectives on this, and that you really let me ask all these questions, being very new to this. So, and coming perhaps from a bit skeptical, mind towards this, I felt like we really delved into different perspectives, which
Yeah,
I
and I
am
think you
very
need to be
grateful for.
skeptical until you
Yeah.
really know. Why would you take it on faith or belief, especially considering that there are incredibly positive stories and there are also some incredibly
Yeah.
negative stories.
And we
And
want to understand that, Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think that that's very, very important. And it's, like I said, worthy of the exploration. I would recommend to anybody who's going to take ayahuasca, if it is for a personal medical reason, that they should do it after they've explored other avenues. They should explore avenues that are more akin to something that they understand. And that only if those avenues fail them, then I think it should be something that they go try. If that's something they want to do, with an understanding that there are risks involved, with the understanding that it is shamanism, with the understanding that it is about energy and about spirit, and it is also about these, incredible substances.
Thank you so much, Hamilton. We have to end this interview now. But thank you so much for your time. And I'll put your website here. So if you guys want to check out Blue Morpho, you can look at the website here. And thank you so much. And good luck
You're very,
with your
very
work.
welcome. Yeah, and if people are interested in my personal work, they can also check it out on hamiltonsouther.com. There's many other explorations of consciousness that we do other than just ayahuasca shamanism. And that may be more interesting to people who don't want to journey to the Amazon.
Right. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching, guys. Much light from Oslo. Bye-bye.